So welcome to the Sights and Sounds of Wetlands and Wildlife. And before I go on, I know you folks are probably concerned, but don't be afraid. No frogs were harmed in the making of this. Whoa! Wait a minute. No frogs are harmed in the making of this presentation. And I created this presentation all by myself. Thank you very much. Well, actually, my daughter helped me quite a bit, and that's why I have this silver hair. It took me a while. But this, by the way, is the 20th anniversary of me presenting this. It used to be on carousel slides, and then it was on PowerPoint, and finally it was on Prezi to help my daughter Amanda. And I want to let you know that this presentation's good for the beginner as well as the expert naturalist. I should know because I'm still a beginner. That's to remind me to play the sounds. And for you folks to be aware that there will be sounds, so don't walk away. This is the globe, of course, and here we are. This is strictly in Massachusetts. We always want to know vocabulary. So these are the vocabulary words we're going to be looking at today. The first big one is, what is a wetland? Look at the words breaking down simply. It's land, it's wet land. Land tells you the definition. So it's land that is wet. It sounds so simple until you get out there in the field and try to figure out where it is, because it does lend itself to certain definitions based on different government agencies. So that's where people get the big fancy houses and the nice cars, by defending these lines. Ecosystems, for our purposes here, different types of wetlands. We'll go through a few wetland types. Biodiversity, so animal variety, so different types of plants and animals. We'll see a couple of examples of the food web, how animals and plants live together. We'll look at the life cycle of these animals, which is how animals and plants grow. So from egg till they lay eggs again. That'll be the life cycle. We'll see examples of the water cycle. So it's very important to understand that the water has a great influence on the wetlands because it's land that's wet after all. So we'll see how wetlands change naturally, and also through human activities, how wetlands can change. We'll have some examples of different human interactions. Let me back up quickly. So wetlands protection can be broken down into three different governmental authorities. The local wetlands protection from a town, for example, or other municipality. State, I work for the state, and the federal government. Now we're going to get into the presentation a little more deeply. And I want you to notice that the wetlands have different types of vegetation. Grasses, shrubs, and trees. So the first type of wetland that I want to talk about is the forested swamp wetland. The forested swamp wetland sounds like it is, just like by the definition. It's a swamp, it's forested. So I can see here that the trees are growing through the water. This is in the spring now. So the first thing you notice about the trees is there are no leaves. So the leaves have fallen. This is what you might hear. Swamp wetland. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear that well. You see on the bottom of the screen, there are two sounds. Wetlands tend to have more than one and different species in different kinds of wetlands. There's another sound for you, a different one. Three sounds I've heard. Similar wetland in the summer. Leaves are leafed out, they pop through the buds, and the leaves now give shade to the wetland. And decaying leaves that fell from last year aren't there anymore because something's composting them. We'll look into that later. And those decaying leaves create a duff on the forest floor and a detritus sheet on the bottom of these wetlands. And you won't hear as many animals in the late summer, by the way. The second wetland I want to talk to you about is the pond wetland. And you can see right here that it looks very different than the other one. What I notice about it is there are no trees growing through the center of it. I see a ring of vegetation. I see trees way in the background, and right up close, I see, right on the pond edge, I see some shrubby vegetation. And then I might see some other plants. In this picture, I can barely make them out, but in the real life, I'd be there and checking out for vegetation breaking through the water. You don't always have vegetation coming through the water either. But basically, a pond would have a lot of water, no trees going through it, grass, shrubs, and trees along the perimeter. And this is what you might hear. And right now we're coursing different animals, and I'm trying to show you different animals. So if you've been following along, we've already heard probably at least 3 different animals. And some repeat, of course, because they intermingle between types of wetlands. Blink, blink, blink. Sounds like a banjo. Blink, blink, blink. To me, it does. Are we still counting? Is that 5? It's okay if you only got 3 or 4. All right, that was enough fun. Now, keep my voice low because you might have turned your volume up, and I don't want to ruin your speakers or your eardrums. Coastal interdural swale wetland. Now, I'm looking at this, and it looks like the dunes, of course, but I'm looking at the brown staining. That's where water came in. But is it really a wetland? Well, yes, sometimes the ocean comes in and gets things wet, and there are animals that rely on that water. And the last type of wetland I want to talk about is an isolated vegetated wetland. Here's a perfect example of an isolated vegetated wetland. And right away, I can see that it doesn't meet the definition. You might not have noticed it, but I can see right away there are trees growing in it, but there are also trees out around it. So there's a lot more open water, but there's still trees going through it. This is in the winter, of course, and the water's frozen. So is it still a wetland? Still a wetland, excuse me. Why, of course, it's my presentation. I want it to be a wetland. But like I said before, it depends on the definition. So the water here is frozen, but it's basically a small temporary pond. It's really a hybrid wetland. It's not a pond. It's not a forested swamp. It's in the middle. It does dry up. So this is the same wetland in the spring. No leaves on the trees. And this is what you might hear in these wetlands. And these are unique wetlands because of the hybrid nature. It's going to have unique sounds as well. So here goes. And notice the tree in the middle? That same tree from the previous view. Can we hear this? All right, so a couple more sounds. This is the same wetland in the summer. Same tree. And you can see it's all dried up. So the question is it still a wetland? Well, yes, of course it is, because again, it's my slide presentation. But when you go on the field, you don't really know. When you go in the woods, you don't really know for sure. You have to check a few different things. It doesn't always have to be vegetated with wetlands vegetation. So this is an ephemeral temporary breeding area, and it's a vernal pool. It's not certified necessarily, but it's still a vernal pool. By the late summer, the vernal pool will dry up, and the question is, where do the animals go? So somehow they get to the vernal pool, and then they have to leave because there's no more water. So I want to explore now. I'm going to go through large animals and go to smaller animals by class type. So white-tailed deer. These vegetarians come along and eat the nice green shoots around wetlands. It doesn't matter what kind of wetland, because a lot of animals will share the different ecosystems, the different wetland types. So just because you saw deer in this slideshow doesn't mean they're going to be deer in every single wetland. And a lot of deer hang out in the uplands too, certainly. This is a male wood duck. It sounds something like this. If you're a bird out there, I apologize if that's not right, but that's what it sort of sounds like to me. Eats vegetation and insects, as you can see there. But the important thing I want to note here is that the females are dull brown, so they look like leaves, whereas the males are beautifully ornate with their colors of orange and teal. I just like to say that. Some animals, they have the same color, males and females, sometimes not. In this case, not. The interesting thing about the wood duck is they have a strategy where they will protect the female while she's on her eggs, because she doesn't want to leave her eggs because they might become food for the fox that's coming around. The male wood duck will distract the predator, and actually can climb trees. It doesn't necessarily fly away, it can climb trees, and it gets so far away that a lot of times the scent from the female is missing. The pipe and plover on, for example, Plymouth Long Beach will do a similar thing. The plovers look very similar, male and female, but the young are born precociously, so the eggs are laid and then that's it. They don't, after the eggs hatch, then they're on their own. But while the eggs are in the nest, usually an excavated sandy area, the female might go off the nest and fake a broken wing and then fly away much further from where the eggs are laid, and the fox doesn't get the scent, so they get to live another day. Just different and interesting strategies to me. And I want to make sure you understand that not all wetlands are the same, not all animals act the same. The sounds are different, and they even act differently during different times of the year or when it's raining. So we just went through the mammals, now we're at a class. The reptiles, turtles, this is a spotted turtle. It's no longer protected under Mass Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program in the state. It's delisted, I guess, but it's still worth protecting. And it will eat spotted salamander eggs if given the chance, meaning animals in the vernal pools feed on other animals, wetlands will feed on other animals. This is a snapping turtle. I've got an example of that, except not with a snapping turtle. I just want to show you real quick, and we can look at this later. I just want to give you a sense about that size. You can see my hand. They can be a little bit bigger than that, but that's the basic size of the turtles. But unfortunately for some animals, like this animal, it might get eaten by a duck, for example, or even a skunk. But when it gets larger, and they can get big shells, just to show you, this is a shell of a snapping turtle. It's a portion of a shell. Here's the head. Here's a smaller one. It's more of a normal size. This is pretty big. And keep in mind that turtles, just so you know, as a tidbit of information, turtles cannot be pulled out of their shells. The spine is built into the shell. It's all one. It's like a unibody car. You break his neck and pull up his tail before you pull the animal out. So please don't try this at home. Again, they start out very small. They start out very small. painted turtle. I think I have one here that's crushed up. It's just shell plates. I don't think I have a box turtle, but I have a box turtle shell that was pecked by a bird. We can see these later on. I just want to pique your interest so you don't fall asleep on me. Notice a duckweed in the pond. So this beats the 4th grade core curriculum. So if you're in school and you need some extra credit, this will help you. And you can notice that the turtle has its feet in the water. So it's more of a pond wetland, but other turtles don't need to necessarily be in the ponds. Eastern ribbon snake, another reptile. Keep in mind that big animals usually eat the smaller animals. So the advantage is to be big. Notice a raccoon mask. That sound familiar to anyone? We just heard it today. Probably can go to this size. Start out really small. So I'm going to go through the wood frog life cycle. These are very unique animals. So keep this in mind. Every spring, the wood frogs are going to come out from the dry forests to a vernal pool, not any old wetland, but to a vernal pool, the temporary vernal pool. Because you can't have these little guys in there. You can't have fish in a vernal pool. So gobble them up. The wood frog has a type of glucose or sugar that keeps the animal's blood from crystallizing and ripping apart its capillaries. We get frostbitten, they don't. So that's all the clucking you hear. It's not chickens. Cluck, 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 right? It's not chickens. The wood frogs mate this way. The male's on top, the female's larger, and she's on the bottom. She lays her eggs in clusters, and the male fertilizes them externally. Then the male and female take off to go back to where they came from. So when you go to a vernal pool, you'll see clumps of eggs that look like this. Sometimes they're on the shoreline, sometimes they're deep in the middle. The animals have figured out where to place the eggs because they've been coming every year to do this. The first time they go out into the woods to find them somehow, and they come back. So they've only been to it once, really. This is what they look like when they hatch. Some people call them tadpoles, but they're wood frog larvae or amphibian larvae, frogs and toads. It takes about a month. And notice the green coloration. That is symbiotic algae growing in the gelatinous egg matrix. So they've hatched out of the eggs. Now they're going to feed on the algae. They're going to grow. But keep in mind that they are really fish. They hatched out of their eggs as fish. They're breathing from gills. And of course, they have to become land breathers at some point. That's the crazy part. I wanted to show you this to show you that these animals are the same age. However, they're two different species. The top one is the wood frog with the gold flecks, and don't ask me where the gold comes from. I don't think you should go mining vernal pools for gold. And then it looks like a black goldfish coloration. That's a toad tail. This is a photo of a wood frog that's starting to metamorphose into a frog. So it starts out like this, tadpole, then has legs and front legs. So the hind legs grow out of the body first. Now when I was in school, we did experiments adding hormones to these animals. I ended up with a hind leg growing instead of the hind legs growing first. And in case you're wondering why there's normally these vernal pools dry out, and it's very convenient to hop on their bellies like a skid and get on to the next vernal pool, or next portion of the drying out pool, the deeper portion. If only the front legs came out, it'd be like Tyrannosaurus Rex trying to, walk around. So these animals have big bodies, and the front legs are very weak compared to the hind legs. So it's important to have those hind legs go first. And if you look carefully at it, or quickly at it rather, I should say, it looks like a salamander. Looks like a salamander. Good thing it sticks. So think about it. They have to change completely inside and out from water breather, or air breather from the water, using gills, to using their lungs when they come out. And some will die if it dries up too quickly, if the vernal pool dries up too quickly. This is a small wood frog tadpole. It has the raccoon mask. I can also tell, oh, actually, I didn't explain this, but it's important to me. The big question is, what do frogs do with their tails? Well, the answer is they don't just drop them. So I call this the frog's lunchbox. It absorbs its tail slowly as it's trying to get out of the vernal pool to go out to the forest. So it gets absorbed by the body. It'll live about 2 or 3 years before it matures to then complete the cycle by coming back and laying eggs. So at this point, I want to go explore a little more, see and listen for more animals that we've already heard before. Some of them are new, most of them we've heard before. And this is, again, Wetlands in Massachusetts. Keep in mind, I can find these animals in vernal pools or other areas, but the wood frog is exclusively in a vernal pool. This is a spring peeper. It's one of our true Massachusetts frogs. It has suction cups on its feet. One of our true tree frogs. There are 2 species of tree frogs in Massachusetts. This is one of them. So it literally can stick to things. When I came home one day, I found one on the glass of my storm door. I took it off and I threw it down. I think I threw it in the woods, let it get away, and it came back again. So I thought it was an omen, so I brought it in the house. But before I got it in the fish tank, it stuck to my cabinets and it stuck in my daughter's hair. So that really is what kept me to keep it and grow it out. So I actually had it in my basement in a fish tank, and I kept feeding it spiders. So this is a spring peeper. This is about how big they are. This is a ruler, a little more over an inch. I'll find that again. They're calling back and forth now. Little tiny animals. Now, Ron McDonald is on tonight, and he took some pictures in a previous presentation, and he said that he probably finds more spring peepers at night than during the day, and that might be because they're more active at night. Also, they're not as afraid of the other animals that might be sleeping during the night. It's one of my faves. Grow by that size, sometimes this big. They have a throat pouch that expands like a balloon. You can see it in this photo. If you can read the screen, you'll know that I'm going to say it's a chameleon. It's a Massachusetts chameleon. You don't have to go anywhere else to see these animals. You don't have to go to the tropics. You don't have to go to a pet store to get these. We have these in our backyards. What I really like about these animals is they can change color to blue or camouflage color here, which is where I usually, the color I normally see. They can turn black or dark. And when they're young, they do something other animals don't do. They have a different coloration. Excuse me. This is what they look like when they're young, and I've caught one of these. The other animals don't do that. Now this is the American toad. Notice the eggs are in a string. They're not in a cluster or a clump. So I'm going to, what am I going to do? Oh, here it is. Can you hear that okay? Is that too loud? That's me. So that's a trill. And it goes on that long. In the coastal interdiluvial swale, we have the Fowler's toad. Looks very similar to the American toad. Oops. Oops, sorry about that. I'm going to play a sound. Just want to let you know that if you're muted, you can try this at home. I'm not going to know. So now's the time to experiment. These do sound like this. I call them the whiny kid toads. And there's the young guy in here. Sorry about that. Spade-footed toad, very rare toad. It's like the vowels A-E-I-O-U and sometimes They have a vertical pupil, not a horizontal one. That's very unique to these animals. Another unique characteristic of these animals, they can hatch out in 2 weeks. Can you imagine that? Hatch out and metamorphose into a frog from egg to frog that leaves in 2 weeks. And they hang out in sandy soils. They burrow in the sand. They're very rare. Northern leopard frog. Notice the spots, like a leopard spots. Sounds like you're squeezing a balloon, twisting it. Here's the pickerel frog. Sounds like it's snoring. There aren't spots, but they're little pickle jar shaped rectangles. They also have yellow thighs. They use in experiments when you go to a high school, you have to dissect the frog. They'll probably use those. Also, frogs have a unique sense of hearing, an external eardrum. It'll be on the right on the side of its, right on its behind its eye or in its cheek. Here's a green frog. See the eardrum there? They can feel our vibrations when we go to a pond, so they're more likely going to jump in the water before we even get to see them. So it's important to, if you want to identify these animals, it's important to get to know their sounds. So here's the green frog. Also, the green frogs have what's called a dorsolateral ridge that the arrow points to. And why is that important for identification? Well, if you looked at a bullfrog that's the same size, it could be a different age, but the same size, it won't have those ridges, and you'll see that in the next slide. But in this case, this one has a dorsolateral ridge. When the bullfrog gets really big, it won't matter because they get so big that you can't mistake them for anything. But these green frogs look very similar to bullfrogs. But here's what they sound like. banjos. Bullfrog. That's chorusing bullfrogs. This slide shows how large they can be. So you got one here. These are actual size. We'll show them, I can show them later. Let me see. Right there. They're pretty big. How do they get that big? The pond might dry out, you might say. Well, actually, they only hang out in ponds, real ponds that stay with water all year long. Otherwise, they wouldn't make it. So it might take them 2 years to grow. 2 years. Rachel, do you have any questions in the chat? Because I want to switch gears to talk about another amphibian.
Not at the moment, but I actually had a question.
Sure.
Is the bullfrog considered invasive in Massachusetts?
That's a good question. I'm glad you're going to do your homework and tell me.
Okay. I thought it was.
Sorry, I don't know. I think Rob should look that up because he's the expert in frogs.
All right. Nobody else is typing anything in, so I think we're good to keep going.
Unfortunately, I'd show you a lizard, but we don't have any more in Massachusetts because they've been extirpated, which means they're not extinct, but they're not in Massachusetts, probably because of housing and roads fragmenting the environment. But we do have salamanders left. And keep in mind that salamanders are like wood frogs. And you're going to see why. So they come across streets to get to these vernal pools. These salamanders are very unique. They dig in the ground, and they come out of the ground every spring. So this is an adult spotted salamander. I wish they'd call that yellow spotted because there are blue spotted salamanders, but this is a spotted salamander. That's a large adult. So here's the life cycle. Snow. So first warm spring rains come in March and April. Sometimes there's still snow on the ground. We had an April Fool's storm recently. And some might turn back. When the weather gets funny, especially nowadays, the winter's been crazy. They've been really warm and cold and warm and cold, and that wreaks havoc, I think, with these animals. So they might skip a year. This is how they mate. The males come in and drop off little sperm packets, and the females come by and pick them up. Those little white things are spermatophores. They only come out for a couple of nights. They call it big night. Those warm spring rains don't happen very long. It's when it's above biological zero, so above 40 degrees. When I like to come out to the vernal pools early and cheat. I want to check the vernal pool. I like to cheat because it gets complicated when you try to figure out eggs. But if you come out early enough, let's say in May, even early May, there are only a couple of different egg masses you'll see. Salamanders or frogs, and they're going to be obligate vernal pool species. You won't find them in a pond. So in this case, you can see that the eggs, you can actually see the eggs better because they're more defined because they're larger. They have double casings on them as well. So instead of being loose eggs, they're literally eggs inside of a big egg mass. Take about 6 to 8 weeks to hatch out. This is what they look like when they come out. They already have little legs, but they have something funny about them. Notice the gills. The other frog tadpoles had gills that were internal, and of course they lost their tail. So first the legs will grow in these animals. They might be buds, they'll grow out. I've heard they are born like that. but the legs will mature, and then the gills will slowly shrink into the body. Again, that's their lunch box. Then they leave the vernal pool as a salamander. So here's an emergent. Here's what they look like. Now, why is that important? Well, for me, it was important because in this line of work I do a lot of volunteering. I collect a lot of dead animals. Someone came up to me and said, "Hey, Carlos, I found this on the street." And I looked at it and I found little flecks on it, just like this one here. So these animals are fish, they become land breathers. Keep an eye on those flecks. Flecks become, as you can see in the adult, or remember, they become spots. The spots are, of course, the one predators, because why would you be camouflaged as a dull gunmetal blue or gray color with yellow spots? An interesting thing about these animals, though, is they can identify them to the individual, not just to the species. Similar to whales, humpback whales, their tails, for example, can be used by looking at the barnacle scarring, what animal they are. What's in, like old salt. We have a picture of salt. You know what salt is. She's not old, but she's salt. So there's a college teacher at Wheaton College, Scott Shumway, who actually takes pictures with the students. He collects animals as they come to the vernal pools, puts some flashing in a fence, basically, a 1-foot high fence. He puts buckets in the ground, coffee cans. He covers them inside and outside the vernal pool. He pops the covers off, collects the animals overnight during these warm spring rains, and he sees all the animals that have come in. They hit the flashing, go left and right and drop in. Then they take pictures and identify them. They draw them. And they can identify which animals come back year after year. So next time you see an animal, don't just think it's just an animal. It's actually Fred or Joe. Now they come back every year, just like the wood frog. They can grow to be about 8 inches. I used to have one of these. That's 6 inches. This is a ruler right here. So the bottom of this, 8 inches. That's pretty big. And they can live about 20 years. Keep in mind, there are all kinds of salamanders out there. They're not just all the same. Because I showed you one doesn't mean they're always going to be there. So be careful when you cross the streets, because they do get killed. Same as turtles, except they come out only during the warm spring rains. Turtles can come out at different times. There's a blue spotted salamander. It's very rare. The spotted salamander with the yellow spots is not rare. And some people living in the Plymouth area, I know, like I had one in my wells. You might find one in your yard, even though there won't be a wetland very close by. This is a marbled salamander, another salamander, and I want to give you an idea that salamanders aren't all the same. This one lays its eggs in the dry, not in the water. It waits for the water to come. So it lays its eggs when there's no water. The eggs hatch after the water fills up in the fall, and the larva can actually grow under the ice. So in the next year, the larva can transform into mature land salamanders. But think about it, they have an advantage by coming out early. Remember what I talked about? Bigger means you're stronger, and of course you have a better chance of eating something smaller. So they have an advantage, they grow faster. These are redback salamanders. There's a redback and a leadback phase. Redback is what I see most often. They're different to me because I see different ridges on their bodies. There are 23 or so rib intercostal grooves. That's the muscles that attach to the ribs that you can see coming through the skin. The other salamanders have about 13. But another important thing to know is these animals don't need any water. I'm going to give it away. Probably shouldn't have, but anyway, in a live presentation, I'd ask you to raise your hand. These are land animals. You can find them under your deck, little white eggs. They don't need water. This is an isopod. It acts as a composter. It eats detritus and leaves. It chews them up. That's why you don't see leaves coming up to your neck. Oh, that was his head back there. Sorry about going so fast on the slides. This is a dragonfly larva. I want to show you. This is what they look like when they hatch out. So they'll climb up on a twig, that come out. They have internal gills. And they shed their skin. This is what the skin looks like. It's an exuvia, it's a shed. Now they're insects. Those are wing buds right there. Here's another one that looks very similar, but it's a damselfly. And it has external gills, wing buds there, and external gills on the end. And if you were to become an expert like me, you would say, look, that animal that's on that twig is like its wings is out like a plane. But if the wings fold back like a butterfly, you'll say, oh, that's a damselfly. There are exceptions, but that's how you can become an expert like me. This is a caddisfly larva. A caddisfly larva break up bits of vegetation and glue them to their backs. I call this the world's smallest mobile home. Instead of bits of debris, vegetative debris, they can actually use sand. I've seen the sand ones, the little sand tubes. And that was an aquatic water beetle. That water beetle has little air bubbles on it. Acts like a little scuba tank, so it can breathe through its spiracles, which are the holes in the side of its body. That's how they breathe. They don't breathe oxygen through the water. They don't have gills. So water boatmen, keep in mind they do bite the predators. So we've looked at the class insecta. Now we're looking at crustaceans, the fairy shrimp. Now these are obligate vernal pool species, only come out in vernal pools, and they're pretty small animals. It probably is no bigger than this, no bigger than your thumbnail. That was a male, this is a female. That's a brood pouch. Can't have any fish in a vernal pool now. You won't find these in ponds. They wait for the vernal pool to dry out. That signals them to lay the eggs, and then they wait for the water to come back. And they can actually do it a couple of times a year. Bivalves, these little clams. They filter feed, just like quahogs do, but they're freshwater. They can be in ponds, they can be in intermittent streams, rivers, they can be in vernal pools. And that's an aquatic flat snail. Just want to show you a couple of examples of the food web. This is a spring peeper, which is lunch for this predaceous diving beetle. I don't know if you can see it, it might be blocked, but he's pinching onto the animal. He hangs there like a scorpion, and his tail has a tube in it, and that's up at the water, and it pulls the water through its surface tension. Similar to when you put a paperclip on the water, you can bounce it, you can float a paperclip on the water. That's water surface tension, and that's what these animals rely on. They rely on the physics of nature to help them breathe and not suffocate. They have their tube, and they have basically a straw that they can breathe air from, just waiting for the predator to come by. This is an annelid, another class of animals, Annelida. It's an earthworm, except, I mean, it's similar to an earthworm. It has ridges like an earthworm and everything. And it's eating wood frog eggs at this point. So it's a medicinal leech. It will literally suck your blood. If you go diving in a pond, you might find them on your face mask like I did. You go in a vernal pool, you might find them in the vernal pool. I've seen them. They don't have to be in a vernal pool though. They're facultative species, not obligate like the wood frog and the mole salamanders, the big salamanders, and like the fairy shrimp. These animals need each other. So now that you've seen different kinds of wetlands in Massachusetts, and you've seen what lives in them and what uses them, I want to go into what can happen to them. Perfect example. So if you go into the woods and you hear this sound, there's probably a wetland nearby. Right. So the wetland is getting filled in to make room for what? subdivisions, for the roads and for the houses. That's a stormwater basin. Now the wetlands have to leave when they're being excavated out. The animals in the wetlands have to leave because they're being excavated out. And that's just the nature of the business. And then they're going to pour stormwater into it. So it won't be the same kind of wetland, it won't be as pristine. But you'll still have animals growing in there. There will be animals that'll come. For example, if you fill this in and put a parking lot over, the animals would come and try to mate on top of the parking lot. That has happened. When gas lines come in, these lines up top, this is what happens. So the animals get displaced temporarily, they come back, they won't have the same structure. You won't find dragonflies coming here because there's nothing to stay on. You won't find certain birds coming because there's nothing to perch on looking for an animal. They'll have to be up high in the trees, or they'll go somewhere else. But it's not all bad news, it's just something that happens. So this quarry was dug out, blasted out, and now we've got some of the animals we've heard before. I can hear a couple of different animals. Wetlands protection. I'm just going to list quickly several different ways we can protect wetlands. First off, contact the Conservation Commission. And if they're not doing something about it, maybe you can volunteer and get them excited about it too, like you might be. I worked in Plymouth. We had a wetlands protection bylaw that helped protect isolated vegetated wetlands. So it didn't matter if they had water, as long as they had some kind of vegetation, that's what the trick was. Because when you have water, and it has to be a certain amount of water, and it's very difficult to meet that depending on the topography of the land. Under the state, we can only protect so many different types of wetlands by definition. The town bylaw in Plymouth, for example, protected 500 square feet. Mass DEP can only look at connected to another wetland or a pond or some other water body, or have a certain amount of water. You can certify a vernal pool, it becomes an area that becomes protected using the Mass Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program. You can go to www.vernalpool.org, and there's lots of information there for you to see how to do that. The Army Corps of Engineers protects special aquatic sites, especially if they're certified as a vernal pool, but not necessarily. Then the EPA has a raindrop program. This is what you would do to certify a vernal pool under the state Natural Heritage Program. You see the different maps, pictures. You have to show that the water isn't connected to another water body, just to make sure fish can't get in there. So in conclusion, finally, what is the wetland? We talked about what a wetland was, basically ecosystems, and the different types of wetlands would be the swamp, vernal pool, pond, and there are more. We talked about biodiversity with different animals and of course their life cycles. I quickly talked about the food web, and the water cycle has been going on throughout the whole slideshow, from ice to the water drying out in the vernal pools. Human activities, showed you a couple of examples, and then I just quickly went over wetlands protection. So I want to give credit to the Wicked Big Puddles program, which was the Teachers program created by the Reading Memorial High School students with the help of their teacher, Leo Kenny. And the natural, well, actually it was I already mentioned it's a carousel slide presentation that became PowerPoint and then it became Prezi. The Natural Heritage paid for the slides to be created for this teacher program. If you want to donate, you can donate anytime you want, especially on your tax forms, just check off the box. And some credits to unnamed sources. I just want to say at this point, thank you for taking an interest in the environment. And that was it.
Woo! Thank you, Carlos. All right, so let's have you go to stop share and we'll come back into our meeting so we can see each other. Hello, everybody. At this point, if you want to turn your video on, I welcome you to. If you want to stay off the video, that's fine too. I just want to say thank you to Carlos for that presentation, for doing this for Wildlands Trust. I really appreciate it. We had quite a few people on the call tonight, so thank you for all of you for joining. I am going to be sending a follow-up email with some of those links that Carlos mentioned, so ways that you can stay involved and learn more about wetlands. I'll also send a link to the Wildlands Trust website and ways that you can stay involved with Wildlands Trust, as well as a program evaluation to give us feedback about these virtual programs. Obviously, this is a new format for us. We're used to bringing you programs live and in person, but for the last month or so, we have been doing them this way. So I hope you enjoyed it. The next programs, before I get to questions, and feel free to throw some questions into the chat if you have them right now, and I'll read them out for Carlos. The next program is next Thursday night with Brian Harrington. He is going to be doing a shorebird identification talk. And then the following week on Wednesday in the afternoon, we're going to be doing a virtual cooking class with food historian Paula Marcoux, and you're going to learn how to make chive pancakes. It's going to be really good. So I hope you'll join us at either of those, and then maybe, hopefully, we could start offering some outdoor programming again this summer. We're in phase 2 now, so we're looking at ways to safely do that. But stay tuned with Wildlands Trust. Okay, we have a question in the chat. First, a comment from Joe. He found a marbled salamander at Muddy Pond in Kingston about a month ago. That is very cool. Is that rare, Carlos?
Especially around here.
Yeah.
I would suggest that he contact Natural Heritage. Just go online, Mass Natural Heritage Endangered Species Program. There are forms you can fill out. I did the same. I found some diamondback terrapins in a couple of towns around here and some water bodies. So I'm going to send that information up so they can get a handle on if these animals are still around.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I submitted online to the Natural Heritage Endangered Species Program, like on the vernal pool tracker or whatever. I submitted everything to them, and I guess the biologist is looking at this pool now, and they'll come back to me and let me know. It's as of right now, it's not even listed as a potential or a certified pool. So I found 5 different egg masses in the pool itself and submitted all that evidence to them, and hopefully they'll come back and say, hey, we'll certify it. So kind of excited.
Yeah, me too. I'd like to see it sometime.
Yep.
Okay, we have a question from Bruce Howard. He's asking, how successful are wetlands restoration efforts in bringing wetland creatures back? For example, the Eel River headwaters.
No more questions. Oh gosh. Well, I guess what we found out through an internal study at DEP, most wetlands don't even get started, so they fail right off the bat. So I don't really know. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know who to ask either. Maybe you could just send a general comment to someone in wetlands. It's very tricky. So the question was Eel River headwaters?
Yeah, as an example of a restoration of a wetland. Yeah. I would recommend asking the folks at Living Observatory and also Mass Audubon for Tidmarsh in Plymouth. They have done extensive research on the animals that have come back with that restoration, and the state ecologist that did the restoration at Tidmarsh is the same person who did the Eel River headwater restoration. They're the only 2 in the state, and the Tidmarsh one's the biggest that's ever been done in the country.
Yeah, that's good advice. I probably should have said that. The wetlands can change and still be wetlands, so you can have a bog, a cranberry bog, and make it into a forested swamp. It might be considered a success, but that might not be what you're trying to do. If you want to create certain species of plants, I mean, encourage certain species of plants to grow, to encourage species of animals to come, that's a little trickier. And like I said, it gets really complicated because a lot of people don't understand wetlands, and a lot of wetlands are flagged to be conservative. So when they do a replication area, they're done in the upland, just on the outside of the edge of the wetland, because the person wanted to be conservative. So the DP wouldn't come in and say, oh no, it's not a wetland. And there are different ways to flag wetlands.
So we have another question in the chat here. Do medicinal leeches carry parasites or diseases?
Don't know. I'm sure all animals carry parasites and diseases. Question is, are we susceptible to them?
Okay, Rob, you have a question.
I do. Carlos, you mentioned the fowler's toad, and you showed it in association with a particular type of wetland. Is that true, or might you find it fowlers somewhere else, like, you know, inland somewhere?
I have to say, I don't know. I've only seen him. I've only heard him once. I might have had one in my hands, and I lived in Plymouth at the time. So I've seen him at Little Long Pond.
Okay. All right.
That's Sandy.
Yep.
But I haven't seen him around here. I've only seen the American toad.
Okay. Thank you.
And they do sound like this. Wah, wah, just like you heard. Exactly. It sounds crazy. It was down by the Girl Scout camp, and I thought something was going on.
Yeah.
Girls crying or something. I was canoeing or kayaking.
What about the American toad? What is the sound for that? Okay.
And I could go on and on, because that's what they do. They trill for an exhausting time, but I can out trill them.
Okay.
My claim to fame.
Let's see. Anybody that maybe doesn't see the hand raise feature and just wants to hop off mute and ask a question, you are welcome to. Okay, Tori's got a hand up. Tori, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
What advantages do frogs have if they're laying their eggs in a straight line versus the cluster?
Well, obviously we invited the wrong group here, didn't we? You guys are asking great questions. That looks like a master's thesis project for you. I don't really know what the advantage is, but it may not make a difference. All I know is I've seen clusters of eggs in cart paths. I've got a picture of one that can't be more than 3 inches deep. You would think that would be where the toads would be. But I've also seen some of these big egg masses in areas where the pond is drying up, or the vernal pool is drying up, and it clearly should have been a toad coming in there. The other thing is, it won't really matter because toads come in a lot later in the season. So you don't even see them at first. So they're not going to compete. Different animals, in other words, the tadpoles that are there initially will take off, and then the toads come in, lay their eggs, and there might be some insects, but not more tadpoles from wood frogs. So that might be something to it. Great question. Wish I'd asked.
Going back to the Fowler's toad, Joe says that he has a lot of them at Poksha Pond in Middleborough. That's another inland area where he has found Fowler toads. And,
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Go,
Oh,
Joe.
they're super loud. I have to wake up in the middle of the night. They just drive me crazy, and I flash my flashlight under the cabin and get them out and just carry them and put them away over towards the woods so I can get a little sleep.
You know what I've noticed? I think I've seen one before up close, because I was digging a hole for a fence, and I pulled it up through the postal digger, a double articulated one, so it could get sand. You know, I brought it up, and there it was, and it acted funny. It started doing a weird thing with its body. And the other toads, the American toads, would be shorter and squatter and don't twist their bodies the same way. So I don't know if it was just a coincidence or what, but I've never seen anything like it. I didn't
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Carlos.
talk about some of the sounds that some of the frogs have. If you were to go by a pond and you heard if you heard a green frog, boom, 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 boom. If you step close to the pond edge, it's going to jump in the water and you're going to hear a beep. So even if you don't hear the boom, 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 you can hear a beep and then a splash. That's going to be a green frog. Now a bullfrog is going to sound like this. Poop, poop. I call it a poop frog. It's going to go chug-a-rum, chug-a-rum. You get close, it's going to quiet down because it's got those big eardrums, and then it's going to go poop, and then you hear a big splash. So keep that in mind. And if you hold a toad in your hand, it's going to go, it's going to complain a bit. And I've heard also that these frogs sound differently in the rain. If it's a cold night versus a warm night, they're going to sound different. Spring peepers, I've heard, personally, talk to me. They'll be totally quiet. I'll go, and I'll wait. And you'll hear something come back. I'll go, and as soon as I finish, they're back. But I don't do it too often because it does tire them out, and they're there to mate, not for me to play with them. I don't want to tire them out and then have them lose a chance to lay eggs. So it's just something to keep in mind that these animals are individual animals. Maybe you'll have some empathy and tell your friends about them, and anybody who builds houses will start thinking carefully about things. And I've worked with homeowners before with different animals, and the more you get them to appreciate nature, the more they protect it, and then the development's more managed. So that's the big lesson here is whatever you do to these animals, it doesn't matter because you're just going to get more of something else. So if you fill in the wetlands, I'm not saying you're a bad person, but what's going to happen, you're going to have more skunk and raccoons instead of maybe fish or cats or whatever.
We also learned at the last program that the presence of ticks increases with fragmented habitat. So they like to live on the edges. So when you go and build that subdivision, you're also increasing tick habitat.
And these vernal pools are on the edge. The whole vernal pool is an edge, just like when you go to the ocean, the air to the water is an edge, the beach to the west. You get the most interesting life and more diversity. The vernal pools are an edge because they dry up. That's the edge. If you go to a pond, it's always a pond. So you get the same kinds of animals all the time, potentially, until the trees start growing in the pond in some cases.
Nick had looked up the answer to his question about leeches, by the way, and Wikipedia says that they carry parasites, but that the parasites don't survive in humans. So,
very good.
Thank
you, Nick.
I don't see any more questions, but everybody can feel free to hop off mute if they want to say anything at this time.
I don't think I owe anybody any money, so I think we're safe.
All right. Well then, thank you very much, Carlos. We really appreciate it. Thank you all for joining us.
You're welcome.
We'll see you at the next one.
All right. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Carlos.
Carlos.
Take care. Be safe.
That was great.